The royal family sat in stunned silence. The Queen's last will was about to be revealed, but no one expected Prince Andrew to be the one reading it. The air was thick with tension. Every breath felt heavy. Every glance carried unspoken questions. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. They had all gathered for this. King Charles sat still, his fingers laced together, his expression unreadable. Princess Anne, known for her composure, held her gaze steady. Prince William barely moved, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The Queen's will was supposed to be a formality, a transition of power that followed tradition. And yet, from the moment the envelope was brought forth, it was clear that tradition had already been broken. It was not Charles, the new king, who was asked to read the Queen's final words. It was not Anne, her most loyal daughter. It was Andrew, the disgraced prince, the man the public had turned against, the man who had been pushed into the shadows. Gasps rippled through the room. Why him? The decision made no sense. His recent controversies had left him an outcast. Yet here he stood, holding the sealed document that could alter the course of royal history. A single glance was exchanged between Charles and Anne, brief yet loaded with meaning. Some shifted in their seats. Others avoided looking at Andrew altogether. Even he seemed uncertain, gripping the wall with hands that trembled just slightly. Was this the Queen's final act of mercy, or was there a hidden reason behind her choice? The room, though silent, felt alive with unspoken tension. The walls of Buckingham Palace had heard whispers of power struggles before, but never like this. This was different. This was personal. And it was about to unfold in front of their eyes. Andrew swallowed hard. He had spent his life in the shadow of his elder brother, never meant for power, never seen as a true leader, and now, this moment, the monarchy's fate rested in his hands. He reached for the envelope. The weight of the wax seal felt heavier than it should. Every eye in the room locked onto him as he pressed his fingers against the seal. The sound of the wax breaking echoed through the silent chamber. The Queen's last words were finally about to be heard. No one could predict what would come next. Before revealing who inherited what, the Queen's will carried a heartfelt message, one that would set the tone for everything that followed. As Prince Andrew unfolded the first page, the weight of history pressed down on him. His voice, steady but tinged with hesitation, filled the silent room. The Queen's final words began, not with legal details or property divisions, but with something far more personal. She spoke of gratitude, acknowledging the unwavering service of her family to the monarchy. She thanked them for their dedication, their sacrifices, and their role in upholding the traditions she had safeguarded for over 7 decades. It was a farewell, but it was also something more. Hidden between the lines was a message, one that some would see as a plea for unity, while others would recognize as a quiet warning. For the royal family, unity had always been a fragile illusion. Beneath the carefully crafted public image, conflicts brewed, alliances shifted, and power struggles lurked beneath the surface. The Queen had witnessed it all. Her words, though elegant, carried a weight that could not be ignored. Some would call it a reminder, others would call it a reckoning. The room remained still, yet the tension grew. Was she attempting to bring her family together one last time? Or was she exposing the divisions that had long been buried under royal protocol? Andrew continued reading, his grip on the pages tightening. The Queen's words had started with formality, but now there was a shift. The tone grew sharper and more direct. The pleasantries ended, and the true revelations began. This was no ordinary will. It was not just a division of wealth, titles, or estates. It was something far more deliberate. What followed would not only determine who inherited what, but also who truly held power in the monarchy's future. Every person in the room knew that the decisions written on these pages would shape history. Some braced for what was coming. Others held their breath, knowing that no amount of preparation could have readied them for what the Queen had done. Then came the first major shock. Inheritance that defied centuries, old traditions. Windsor Castle was expected to go to King Charles, but then, the Queen made a shocking decision. As Andrew continued reading, the first confirmation brought no surprise. Windsor Castle, the historic residence of British monarchs, was officially passed down to Charles. It was expected, a natural transition of power, a symbol of continuity, but what followed was anything but expected. The next name spoken sent ripples through the room. Sandringham, an estate deeply tied to the ruling monarch, was not left to Charles. Instead, it was gifted to Princess Anne. A murmur spread across the gathering. Sandringham had long been a private residence of the ruling king or queen. It was more than just a home, it was a stronghold of tradition. By leaving it to Anne, the Queen had made a decision that was unheard of. Was this a final act of gratitude to her most loyal daughter? Or was it a calculated move, one meant to shift the balance of power within the family? Charles remained motionless, but those closest to him could see the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something in his eyes. This was not the plan he had envisioned. Then came an even greater shock. Balmoral, the cherished Scottish retreat of the royal family, was not given to a single heir. Instead, it was to be shared among the family. This decision broke centuries of royal tradition. Balmoral had always belonged to the reigning monarch alone. It was a symbol of sovereign authority, a personal space where the ruler of Britain could escape the pressures of public life. And yet, the Queen had divided it. Why? Did she wish to promote unity among her family? Or was this a way to prevent Charles from consolidating too much control? The room felt heavier. Charles, though silent, was visibly uneasy. He had spent his entire life preparing for this role. He had waited for his turn, for the moment he could take full command of the monarchy. But now, with each word of the will, it became clearer that his mother had rewritten the rules. She had altered the very foundation of the royal estate. He would still be king, but did he truly have control over the monarchy? The implications were massive. A shared Balmoral meant decisions would no longer rest with the king alone. Anne's ownership of Sandringham meant that even the traditional homes of the monarch had been reassigned. Charles had inherited the title, the crown, and the weight of expectation. But had he inherited the power that came with it? His expression remained neutral, but inside, was he already thinking of how to respond? But it wasn't just about land. What the Queen did next changed the power structure of the family itself. Royal traditions have always favored men, yet the Queen made a decision that signaled a major shift. As Prince Andrew continued reading, the next name on the list caused a stir. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, was to inherit the Vladimir tiara, one of the most valuable and historically significant jewels in the royal collection. At first glance, it seemed like a simple gift, an elegant gesture from one queen to a future queen, but it was much more than that. This wasn't just jewelry, it was a statement, a mark of trust, a symbol of power. For centuries, royal women had been seen as supporting figures, standing beside kings and princes, never leading in their own right. Yet, here was the Queen, making it clear that Catherine wasn't just the wife of a future king, she was a central figure in the monarchy's future. This was a direct acknowledgement of her influence, a message that Catherine's role would be just as important as William's in shaping the next era of the royal family. But the true groundbreaking moment came next. The Queen made a direct acknowledgement of Princess Charlotte, a move that broke with generations of royal tradition. In the past, daughters of monarchs had often been overshadowed by their brothers, their names barely mentioned in discussions of power. Yet, the Queen ensured that Charlotte's place in history was secured. She left a message that stood apart from the rest. The monarchy is strongest when each member understands their role, she had written. It was a subtle but powerful statement, one that hinted at a future where women in the royal family would not just support the monarchy, but help lead it. This was a shift toward a more inclusive future, a deliberate break from the male-dominated legacy that had defined the institution for centuries. Was the Queen subtly reshaping the monarchy to modernize it? Was this her way of ensuring that the future of the royal family wouldn't be dictated by outdated traditions? As those in the room absorbed her words, it became clear that this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about power, influence, and the legacy the Queen was leaving behind. But the biggest shock was yet to come, a name no one expected to hear. After stepping away from royal duties, most believed Harry would be left with nothing until the Queen revealed her final message. The room, already heavy with tension, seemed to freeze when Andrew read his name aloud. Every gaze shifted, every movement stilled. Some had expected silence where Harry was concerned, a quiet omission that would reflect his departure from royal life, but instead the Queen had decided that no one saw coming. Andrew's voice remained steady as he continued. The Queen had left Prince Harry something far from material wealth. It wasn't money, estates, or jewels. It was a ceremonial sword, one that had once belonged to King George VI, a relic of another era, a weapon of tradition and history. But why? What was the meaning behind this? Was it an olive branch? A final attempt to keep Harry tied to his roots? Or was it a challenge, a reminder of the duty he had turned away from? Eyes darted toward Prince William, his expression carefully neutral, but those who knew him well could see the flicker of something deeper, surprise, perhaps even unease. A sword wasn't just an heirloom, it was a symbol of power, of honor, of responsibility. Some would see it as a gesture of goodwill, proof that, despite everything, Harry was still part of the family, but others would see it differently, a warning, a message that even in her final moments, the Queen had not forgotten what Harry had left behind. The public, too, would interpret this gift in different ways. Supporters of Harry might see it as a token of respect, a quiet acknowledgement that he still had a role to play in the monarchy's legacy, even from afar. Critics, however, would see it as a final plea, a Queen's subtle reminder that duty is never truly abandoned. But what did Harry himself think? Was this an invitation to reconnect, or a burden placed on his shoulders once more? As Andrew neared the end of the will, the weight of the Queen's final words left the room in silence. Her decisions had not just divided wealth and property, they had sent messages, spoken and unspoken, to each member of her family. And for Harry, that message remained unclear. Would this gesture draw him closer to the family he had stepped away from, or would it only serve as another reminder of the world he had left behind? Her reign lasted 70 years, but in her final words, the Queen left behind more than just material wealth. She left a message, one that carried the weight of generations, a plea that echoed beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. As Prince Andrew neared the final pages of her will, the tone of her words shifted. This was not about estates or jewels. This was about family, about the ties that had been tested and strained over the years. She spoke of strength, of unity, of the power that comes not from crowns or titles but from standing together. It was a plea for reconciliation, a final wish from a monarch who had spent her life holding a divided family together. She urged them to move past their differences, to find common ground despite the conflicts that had shaken the royal household. Some would see it as a mother's last attempt to heal wounds that had been left open for too long. Others would recognize it as a ruler's calculated effort to protect the future of the monarchy itself. But one question lingered in the air. Was this message directed at Charles and Harry? There was no mistaking the depth of the Queen's words. She had watched as tensions between her son and grandson grew, as headlines turned private disputes into public battles. And now, with the world watching, she was asking them to put the past behind them. But was it too late? Would they listen, or had the distance between them become too great to mend? As Andrew finished reading, the silence in the room was deafening. Some sat still, their faces unreadable. Others shifted uncomfortably, processing the weight of what they had just heard. Charles remained motionless, his gaze distant. Harry, though absent from the room, was still very much present in the words his grandmother had left behind. The Queen had spoken, but whether her family would honor her wishes was another matter entirely. Would this be the moment that brought them back together? Or was conflict inevitable? The will had been read, but for King Charles, this was only the beginning of a deeper battle. The will was supposed to settle matters, but instead, it created an internal crisis for the new king. As Charles sat motionless in the grand hall of Buckingham Palace, the weight of his mother's final decisions pressed down on him. The division of royal estates, the redistribution of power, and the symbolic messages woven into the will had left him in an uncomfortable position. For decades he had waited for this moment, preparing for his reign, expecting a smooth transition, but now he faced a dilemma that could define his rule. Would he accept the will as it stood, or would he try to regain control? The risk of challenging his mother's final wishes was immense. Queen Elizabeth had spent 70 years earning the trust of the British people. She was a symbol of stability, wisdom, and tradition. To openly defy her decisions could create a backlash unlike anything Charles had faced before. The public had already been watching his every move since he took the throne. Any misstep, any sign of defiance against the beloved Queen's last words could shatter the fragile goodwill he had managed to build. Would the world see him as a rightful ruler, or as a man who disregarded his mother's legacy for his ambitions? Behind closed doors, whispers had already begun. Royal insiders suggested that Charles was weighing his options carefully. Could the will be contested? Was there a way to shift control back into his hands without causing a scandal? Some believed he might explore legal avenues, looking for loopholes in the Queen's decisions. Others speculated that private negotiations were already taking place, attempting to reshape the future of the monarchy from the shadows. But whatever course he chose, the consequences would be severe. Charles wasn't just a king, he was a figure trapped between two worlds. On one side, there were the expectations of his family and the need to maintain order within the monarchy. On the other, the demands of the public, a nation that had seen enough royal turmoil. His ambitions had to be carefully balanced against the reality of ruling in a modern world. If he moved too aggressively, he could turn his people against him. If he remained passive, he risked losing control of the institution he had waited his whole life to lead. The stakes had never been higher. If Charles challenged the will, it could fracture the monarchy itself. Family tensions had already been laid bare in recent years, and this decision had the potential to push them to a breaking point. Would Charles risk it all to reclaim authority, or would he choose to uphold his mother's wishes at the cost of his power? One thing was certain: the future of the monarchy was more uncertain than ever. And while Charles was calculating his next move, another royal was quietly rising in power. Tradition was broken, power was reshuffled, and the future of the monarchy was now uncertain. The Queen's final decisions had set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. With estates reassigned, roles redefined, and unexpected figures rising in influence, the structure of the royal family was no longer as solid as it once seemed. The question now was clear: where does the monarchy go from here? One of the most significant shifts was the growing influence of Princess Anne. Unlike her brothers, Anne had never sought the throne or openly vied for power. Yet, with the Queen's decision to grant her Sandringham, she had been handed a new level of responsibility. To those who had followed the monarchy closely, this was no accident. Anne had long been seen as the Queen's most loyal child, the one who had devoted herself to duty without expectation of reward. Now she found herself in a position of quiet strength. Could her role reshape the monarchy? Would she step further into the spotlight, perhaps becoming a stabilizing force in a family filled with uncertainty? At the same time, Prince William watched carefully. He was the future king, and he knew that the decisions made today would directly shape the monarchy he would one day inherit. The redistribution of estates, the acknowledgement of Catherine's role, and the direct mention of Princess Charlotte were not small changes. The Queen had set the stage for a more modern, more balanced royal family. But how would William navigate this new reality? Would he embrace the shift, recognizing it as a necessary evolution, or would he, when his time came, attempt to restore the old traditions that had ruled the monarchy for centuries? Beyond the palace walls, the public's response was just as divided. Many saw the Queen's final decisions as a progressive step forward, by recognizing the contributions of women, ensuring properties were shared rather than hoarded, and acknowledging Harry even after his departure. She had shown a willingness to adapt. But not everyone was pleased. Some viewed these changes as a break from stability, a challenge to the rigid traditions that had kept the monarchy intact for so long. Could this lead to a deeper divide, not just within the royal family, but among the people who still supported them? The monarchy stood at a crossroads. Would they embrace change, recognizing that survival in the modern world requires evolution? Or would they attempt to reclaim the past, restoring the old systems that had governed them for centuries? If Charles chose to challenge the will, would it signal the beginning of a larger battle over the monarchy's future? Would William's reign continue the transformation, or would he feel the weight of tradition pulling him back? With so many unanswered questions, one thing was certain: the Queen's will wasn't just about inheritance, it was a blueprint for a new royal era. But one thing is certain: the British monarchy will never be the same again. Share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more royal family updates, and we will see you in the next one.